Before you said a single word, they had already identified 3 things about you. Not your background. Not your intelligence. 3 things about your current internal state, your level of certainty, your level of anxiety, and whether you were the kind of person who would negotiate with pressure or simply absorb it. This required no deliberate analysis on their part. It happened the way a room reads temperature before you've located the thermostat. And what makes it worth sitting with isn't simply that it happened. It's that you almost certainly don't know what they found. Most people who have invested real time in studying psychology, behavior, and human dynamics carry a quiet assumption beneath everything they've learned. The assumption is this: that observation moves in one direction. That developing the ability to read people places you on the watching side of the glass, protected by understanding, insulated by perception. But the glass doesn't work that way. Every social interaction is bidirectional, simultaneous, and largely below conscious awareness. And while you've been learning to observe, you have been transmitting, consistently, legibly, and without your permission, a continuous stream of information about your inner state. The question nobody who seriously invests in psychological self-development ever stops to genuinely ask is not whether they can read people. The question is, how easily can people read them back? That inversion lands with a particular weight because you have done the work. You've thought carefully about your patterns. You've traced the origins of your reactions. You carry what feels like genuine self-awareness, not borrowed from a single book, but built through years of paying close attention. And yet there is probably a low-grade frustration running beneath all of it. A persistent sense that despite everything you understand about human behavior, you still find yourself in situations where you gave too much, trusted too quickly, or let someone into a position of influence before you fully understood how it happened. The work should have protected you better than it has. And the explanation you've most likely settled on is that you need to read other people more accurately. That explanation is almost never where the actual problem lives. The first thing that makes someone easy to read is rarely what people expect. Not dramatic emotional volatility. Not being openly warm or expressive. The most readable signal a person broadcasts is something quieter and far more specific: the way they respond to being interrupted. Not the words chosen afterward. The half-second before the words arrive. Whether there is a visible flinch and a recovery. Whether there is an immediate move to reclaim the point being made, or whether the interruption is absorbed and the thread goes quiet. That micro-response tells an attentive observer, conscious or not, a great deal about how you understand your own position in the room. It communicates whether your baseline is security or management. And management, however practiced and refined, is always detectable to anyone who knows what they're looking for. From there, every other signal compounds. How long you wait before filling a silence that belongs to someone else. Whether you laugh slightly before you're certain the other person found something funny. How your tone and body respond to mild, offhand criticism, not direct confrontation, but the ambient, casual diminishment that's easy to pass off as unintentional. If your internal reaction is disproportionate to the lightness of the delivery, that disproportion gets registered whether or not you say anything in response. And perhaps the most diagnostic signal of all, what happens in the seconds immediately after you've said no to something. Whether your no arrives with full weight and stays there without commentary. Or whether your tone, your posture, and your follow-up sentences quietly begin softening the position, offering context that was never requested, preemptively apologizing for an inconvenience that existed entirely in your own anticipation of the other person's reaction. A no that immediately explains itself isn't a boundary. It's a door left open, written in the language of a refusal. Words carry their own layer of legibility that has nothing to do with tone or body language. Over-justification, explaining a decision that nobody actually asked you to justify, communicates to any attentive reader that the speaker is already negotiating against imagined judgment before any real judgment has been offered. Self-deprecation delivered preemptively has a related function. People do this to control how others will diminish them, choosing to land the blow first so the other person's version cannot land harder. And the filler phrases that appear just before statements a person is uncomfortable making, the drawn-out "I mean," or "I don't know if this makes sense but," or "this might sound strange," these mark with surprising precision the exact location where someone's confidence in their own position runs out. Not personality traits. Not conversational style. Acquired behavioral responses to an underlying uncertainty that has never been addressed at the level it actually lives. And completely legible to anyone paying close enough attention. None of this is character. That is worth being precise about. These are behavioral patterns, specific, identifiable, and fully changeable. But they are being read, in real time, by anyone with a particular interest in locating where your compliance begins. Think back now, and you will find an example without much effort, to a conversation where you later realized you had said more than the situation required. More explanation than was asked for. More reassurance offered before it was requested. More qualification layered onto a position that should have stood alone. In the moment it felt like thoroughness. Perhaps warmth. Perhaps just honesty. But observed from the outside, what was actually visible? Not intelligence. Not openness. A need. The specific, quiet, palpable need for the interaction to go a particular way. For something to be confirmed. For the other person's response to arrive in the form that reassured you that you'd handled this correctly. That need is not a minor variable. That need is the most visible thing in the room. And it broadcasts your entire negotiating position before you've opened a formal word of discussion. The technical name for this pattern is urgency leak. It appears when someone wants something, agreement, connection, acceptance, validation, and their behavior subtly shifts in ways they are no longer consciously tracking. Sentences become longer than the content justifies. Tone softens beyond its natural register. Declarative statements quietly reshape themselves into questions by the end. Eye contact changes in a way that carries a faint quality of hope or a faint quality of shame just beneath the surface of whatever composure has been arranged. These are not dramatic signals. They are microsignals. And the people who most reliably exploit social dynamics are not watching for the dramatic ones, those can be suppressed or performed easily enough. They are watching for microsignals precisely because microsignals are very difficult to fabricate. They carry the most accurate information about what is actually operating beneath any managed exterior. There is a version of this that almost everyone has experienced and almost nobody has named for what it is. Think about the last high-stakes conversation you were part of, a request, a negotiation, a moment of real conflict or genuine connection, and notice what you did afterward. Did you replay it? Did you go back over your own words in the minutes or hours that followed, wondering whether you said too much, revealed something you hadn't intended to, or left something inadequately defended? That replay is not merely anxiety. It is the mind recognizing, in retrospect, that something was visible that wasn't supposed to be, without being able to precisely name what. And the next time you walk into a similar situation carrying that unresolved uncertainty, the urgency to manage the perception of you goes up. Which increases the signal output. Which confirms, to anyone reading you, exactly what you were working hardest not to show. Now the shape of everything said so far changes entirely. Because all of this has been pointing outward, here is what is visible, here is what others are reading. But the structural question, the one that explains why this persists even in people who have done real psychological work, points somewhere most people never look. The most self-aware person in the room is often the most readable person in the room. Not because self-awareness creates vulnerability, it doesn't. But because self-awareness, when directed almost entirely outward, toward other people's patterns, motivations, and hidden signals, creates a specific and invisible blind spot. While attention is trained on everyone else's internal state, one's own signal output continues operating without supervision. The internal monologue says, "I understand this person. I see what they're doing. I recognize this dynamic." And while that internal conversation is running, the body is still broadcasting exactly what it was broadcasting before any of the understanding arrived. Perception of others is not the same as management of self. These are two entirely different skills. Most people who invest seriously in psychological development have directed almost everything into the first one. The second one continues operating on its own, largely unexamined, as the default. There is a more specific layer beneath this. People who have done genuine psychological work often develop a visible pattern that could be called effortful stillness. It emerges from real effort, the effort not to flinch, not to overreact, not to fill every silence with language that negotiates on behalf of anxiety. But it has a particular texture that is identifiable by anyone who reads people professionally or instinctively. Real stillness does not announce itself. It is simply the absence of excess. Effortful stillness has a quality of deliberate management around it, a slightly over-controlled quality that reads, to anyone paying close attention, as someone actively monitoring themselves. And that performance of composure tells its own story. It says, there is something here that this person is working to keep from view. Which is, to someone interested in that kind of information, the most compelling signal in the room. The moments when someone most wants to appear unreadable are precisely the moments when they become the most readable. This is not coincidence. High-stakes interactions. Conversations where approval genuinely matters. Relationships where the outcome carries real weight. These are exactly the conditions under which emotional need increases the volume of signal output. The mind registers risk. The body responds with urgency. And someone calibrated to read social environments does not need anything revelatory in those moments, they need only to observe how someone navigates the first 30 seconds after the pressure enters the room. The essential information is already there by then. What changes this cannot be a technique. Techniques are applied, and applied things can always be detected. Applied composure has a different quality than intrinsic composure. Deliberate silence reads differently from natural silence. Deciding not to over-explain is not the same as no longer needing to over-explain. What changes this is something slower and more complete, a genuine reduction in the number of things each interaction needs to confirm. The over-explanation is not a speech pattern, it is the external form of an internal question. A question about whether your position, your judgment, or your presence will be accepted. When that question stops requiring an external answer, the behavior it was generating stops producing itself. Not because you decided to act differently. Because the source of the behavior has shifted. This is the precise difference between social performance and social presence. Performance is the ongoing management of perception, exhausting, inconsistent, and ultimately ineffective, because the energy required to sustain it is itself a signal. Presence is something entirely different. It is the natural output of someone who has moved from needing confirmation to carrying conviction. Someone who no longer requires each interaction to return a verdict on their worth, their competence, or their likability. That person does not perform stillness. Stillness is simply what happens when urgency is no longer running silently beneath every exchange. And here is what becomes possible in that state. Less explanation offered. Longer, genuine pauses that don't create discomfort. Questions that are precise and unhurried. A quality of patience that doesn't read as strategic because it isn't. It is the product of not needing the next moment to arrive immediately. The person who generates minimum signal output while asking maximum questions becomes, without effort or performance, the most powerful presence in any room, not through dominance, but through information asymmetry. They know considerably more about what the other person needs than the other person knows about them. And they did nothing extraordinary to create that gap. They simply stopped filling it with noise. Being easy to read was never a moral failure. It was the default condition of someone who had not yet learned to direct the same precision inward that they applied to looking outward. The vulnerability was never about your warmth, your openness, or the quality of your character. It was about one specific and fully addressable thing. The signals you were producing in high-need moments were running ahead of your awareness of them. That is what was in the room before you finished your sentence. Not your weakness. The distance between what you needed and what you had consciously decided to let them see. You are not an open book because of who you are. You are an open book in the specific moments when you most need a particular outcome, and someone else in the room registers that need before you have registered it yourself. That gap is not permanent. It is not structural. It is simply the part of the work that hasn't happened yet. In the next interaction that carries weight for you, there will be a moment, and you will recognize it now that you know what you're looking for, when you feel the pull to over-explain a position, or to fill a silence that isn't yours to fill, or to immediately correct an assumption someone has formed about you. Don't act on the pull. Don't suppress it either. Suppression is its own signal. Simply notice it. In that single moment of noticing, something that has been operating entirely outside your awareness will become visible for the first time. What becomes possible after that is worth more than any technique could offer. If this reframes something for you, there is more. Subscribe, because the conversations worth having about how the mind actually works beneath everything we present to the world are only getting more interesting from here.